Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao Ias Academy Interview Guidance Program 2023. So in today's lecture we are gonna discuss about the menace of maritime piracy, which is in news in recent times. So if you look at the Red Sea, I hope all of you have a basic idea about where is a Red Sea. Okay, so in Red Sea and the sea which is connecting the Red Sea, there has been attempts of maritime piracy. So increased attempts of maritime piracy, and there's a need for Indian Navy to deploy few of its ships to counter maritime piracy. So apart from the conflict region in the Middle East, which is associated with Israel and Hamas attacks, and Lebanon, Hezbollah and the Houthi of Yemen, so everyone have been involved in the maritime piracy. So therefore, taking this as an opportunity, taking this conflict as an opportunity, few groups in those regions have been increased the piracy of the ships in the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea region. So therefore, in this context, we will understand the menace of maritime piracy. So what exactly is the issue? What are the reasons for maritime piracy, and what are the steps that are required to be taken in this context? Now recently, why it is in news? It is because recently Indian Navy had deployed the ships. Okay, so Indian Navy had deployed few ships and stopped the two pirate attacks of the Somalian coast. So because of this reason, it is in news, right? Okay, right. So so it had stopped two pirate attacks off the Somali coast in span of less than 2 days. Now, not just because of this reason, it has been disrupting the global trade. So because of this reason, maritime piracy has been increasingly discussed. Now in this context, we have to understand what is maritime piracy. Okay, so maritime piracy is actually a robbery or any other violent action. Okay, so please understand the definition, because even if you write any mains answer on maritime piracy, you must write this definition first. So this is actually called as a robbery or any other violent action by the pirates. Okay, so it is taken up by the pirates, and this is particularly for the private ends. Okay, so demanding a ransom from the ship companies, or taking up the control of the vessel or the ships and the goods which are in that particular vessel, and even if it involves losing lives of the sailors on board those vessels. So therefore, this is particularly for the private ends of those pirates, and this does not have any authorization by any public authority, and it is heavily or generally committed on the seas or on the air outside the normal jurisdiction of any state. Okay, so this is generally conducted outside the normal jurisdiction of any state. Now in this context, we have to understand one thing, that the term piracy, in maritime piracy, the term piracy is used to describe a range of different crimes. Okay, from petty theft from ships at sea, or anchorage, to armed robbery or hijacking a ship. So all will be called as a maritime piracy. Now this is what maritime piracy is actually. So however, there are different types of maritime piracy. So we will understand those different types of maritime piracy as well, and what is this type of maritime piracy actually mean. Now firstly, there's a unarmed robbery. Okay, so maritime piracy category, which is armed robbery. Now there are several armed criminals, so they illegally board the ship. Okay, so we have very often seen that the Somalian pirates very often illegally boarding a ship or a vessel. So they particularly steal the cargo which is present, in those ships, not just cargo, the equipment in the ships and the personal belongings of the crew without harming them. So they will not cause any harm. Rather, they mainly steal the cargo, equipment and personal belongings of the crew without harming them, and this is called as armed robbery. And the second type of maritime piracy is hijacking or kidnapping the crew in the vessels, right? So pirates generally seize control of the vessel, Okay, so whenever the ship is in sea, so the pirates used to take control of the vessel and even its crew as well. So they often demand ransom for their release. So they demand this ransom from the ship company and the countries from where the ship belongs to or the crew belongs to. Okay, so this is called as hijacking or kidnapping. Now after that, we need to talk about the violent assault is another type of maritime piracy. That is also a very very intense pirate activity. Now in this violent assault, pirates use physical violence against the crew. Okay, so crew on board the ships, and they physically harass or physically causing harm to the crew and even death. So apart from causing death, so they even steal the valuable assets from the ship. So this type of a maritime piracy is called as violent assault. So after that, we need to talk about the cargo theft. Okay, so cargo theft is also another type of maritime piracy. So in this cargo theft, pirates generally target specific cargo and valuable goods, robbing the vessel of its valuable shipment. So these are the major types of piracy. Okay, so maritime piracy, these are the major types of maritime piracy. So after that, there are other types of maritime piracy as well. Hijacking. Okay, so generally we very often hear about hijacking of a flight, and even hijacking takes place with respect to these cargo vessels as well. So they take control of the ship, and they used to take this ship to the safer location, so that any military action, so that would be beyond any military action by any other country. Here hijacking is a greatest concern, because it generally causes panic in the maritime business. Okay, so when it causes the maritime business, it halts or stops all the maritime trade, and that will leads to the disruption of shipping and even disruption of supply chains. Okay, so this will leads to the establishment of high risk areas, and this will further resultant in increasing maritime insurance premiums, so that ships cannot afford the premiums, or even ships afford the premiums, insurance premiums, so that would particularly increase the prices of various goods. Okay, now ships are major aspects in maritime trade, right? So they ship goods from one country to the another country. Now the insurance premiums are very high for these ships. Generally what happens, in order to take this goods from one country to the other country, ships usually charges higher amount for those goods and services. So in this context, this will certainly increase the prices of those goods which are carried by these ships, and that could certainly have a lot of supply chain disruption, increasing prices, inflation on those countries. For example, imagine a country like India, which has been importing oil. Okay, so generally on ships, insurance premium has increased, so this will impact the oil prices as well in India. So therefore hijacking is a key concern. So after that, we need to talk about disrupting the trade related activities. Now I have already told you how hijacking or maritime piracy actually disrupt the trade activities. Okay, so because it generally creates fear among the commercial shipping industry and commercial vessels, and that would particularly disrupt the transportation of these goods and services across these seas. So therefore it affects the safety of the ships and seafarers, and ultimately it will disrupt the global supply chain, and this will also have impact like global economic recession and even increasing prices and inflation. Now in this context, we have to understand why the areas in recent attacks are most affected by the maritime piracy. So why this Red Sea region? Okay, so Red Sea region and connected Arabian Sea is mostly impacted with the or affected by maritime piracy, and this is what we have to understand. Okay, so in recent years, waters off the coast of Africa. So if you look at the African coast, so something looks similar to this, and this is Red Sea. Okay, so this is Panama Canal, Gulf of Suez. Okay, so Gulf of Suez, right? And then this is Mediterranean Sea. Okay, Mediterranean Sea and Arabian Sea. Okay, so here recently waters of the coast of Africa, so these are the waters of the coast of Africa and Gulf of Aden. So this is the region which is called as Gulf of Aden, and this is Horn of Africa. So sorry, this is Horn of Africa, and even Bangladesh and the Strait of Malacca. So here somewhere at Sumatra island, so there's a Strait of Malacca. So they have seen recent attacks of piracy. Okay, so attacks by the pirates. Okay, so what are the places? The Horn of Africa, Gulf of Aden, Red Sea and Arabian Sea off the coast of Africa, and Malacca Strait and parts of Bangladesh. So they have experienced this attacks by the pirates. Now, however, we have to understand, so why these areas are most affected by the piracy. First and foremost, we have to look into the poor policy domain in these regions. Okay, so these seas are very vulnerable to the piracy, to the threat of piracy, because they very often lack the effective law enforcement. So since these countries lack effective law enforcement, and even there's a confusion, complexity over the jurisdiction with respect to seas. So because of this reason, it very often leads to poor policy making, and poor policy making is also responsible for the piracy. So after that, we need to talk about the capacity building of several countries. Now, if you look at the waters of the coast of Africa, so many countries were poor, and the socio-economic conditions are also forcing people to do this piracy. So therefore, in this context, there is lack of capacity building of the countries which are located off the coast of Africa. Not just these countries, but even several other countries. So their navies were not superior enough to counter maritime piracy. So therefore, the countries that borders the waters do not have the sufficient naval capabilities to counter the maritime piracy. So this is the major reason for the maritime piracy which has been taking place across these regions, as we have already discussed. After that, the other major factor in maritime piracy is political instability in those regions as well. Now, if you look at the Middle East, okay, so if you look at the Middle East, so this is so this is Red Sea, and across the Red Sea there are different countries like Yemen. This is Oman, Saudi Arabia, and then here Israel. You can find Lebanon, Jordan. Okay, so here Yemen, we have seen the civil war. Okay, so there's a political instability in Yemen, and now Iran-backed Houthis have been attacking the ships in the Arabian Sea. So after that, the Hezbollah has also started doing this, and there's also lack of political instability in the Middle East. Now, apart from Middle East, we should also talk about Africa. Okay, so particularly from the Horn of Africa region. So there is also a huge instability, and there's also lack of enough opportunities for the people, and that has been leading factor in maritime piracy. Okay, so it has been forcing people to do the maritime piracy. So therefore, there are few countries which have been facing the internal instability. Now, this internal instability has been hampering the ability of these countries to secure their respective maritime domain, and the political instability also makes it very difficult for the other countries to cooperate with those vulnerable countries for maritime piracy because of this political instability. Now, after that, we need to talk about there are high shipping traffic as well. Now, if you look at the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, Gulf of Suez, and then Mediterranean Sea. So it generally connects the Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Eastern Africa, Middle East with the Mediterranean Sea. So because of this reason, there's a very high shipping traffic in this region, in this particular region. Okay, so because this is a region which has been growing at a faster pace. So it is very often said that the Indo-Pacific region. So the Indo-Pacific region is actually becoming the crux of the global shipping. So therefore, these areas have very high volume of merchant vessels. So these merchant vessels pass very often, and they also connect major sea lanes such as Strait of Hormuz or the Bab el Mandab Strait. Okay, so this has been connecting Strait of Hormuz or Bab el Mandab Strait. So after that, there are narrow passages across these seas, and these narrow passages very often making a potential, a potential opportunity for these pirates to attack these ships. Now, generally, if you look at the Red Sea, so no doubt this is a narrow passage, and even the Strait of Malacca is also a very narrow passage. So generally in these narrow passages, what happens? Ships sail at a slower pace. Okay, so because there should be an enough gap between two or more ships which have been passing through these passages. So therefore, generally what happens? Ships move at a slower rate than their normal potential. So because of this slower pace of sailing, it becomes easier for those pirates to attack these ships. So ships, while sailing through these areas, so they sail very close to each other, and it will reduce the speed and making them easier to target for the pirates. Okay, so very often they become the easier targets for these pirates. So the socio-economic issues are very important that we have to discuss. Now, if you look at the all the countries of the coast of Western Africa, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, okay, so and Mozambique, Somalia, Kenya, so all these countries have been facing a lot of socio-economic issues such as poverty, lack of employment opportunities, and poor governance. So all these socio-economic issues have been a major cause of maritime piracy in this particular region. So the coastal communities have been suffering with the problems like unemployment, poverty, civil unrest, political instability. For example, the Sudan issue. Okay, so they have been facing a lot of issues, and they specifically rely on piracy as a means to survival or get profit. Okay, so because they lack the employment opportunities, so because of this reason, so they very often rely on piracy as a means to survival. And after that, we need to talk about the lack of coordination aspect as well. So there are different countries which lack the coordination with each other when dealing with the piracy or maritime piracy. So, okay, so there are mostly international waters and international straits and archipelagic waters. So that falls within the jurisdiction of maritime jurisdiction of several other different countries. So since it falls under the jurisdiction of different countries, so what happens? There's a conflict, or there's a lack of a proper understanding and complex complex jurisdictions. So all these makes this safety and security of these vessels more and more complex. Okay, so there's a confusion over the jurisdiction of different countries. For example, you can see the South China Sea. So there are different countries who have been fighting for the jurisdiction over the South China Sea, similar to Red Sea and the region which is very near to the Gulf of Aden. So therefore, there's a lot of confusion with respect to the jurisdiction, and this very often leads to the legal complexities and difficulties in coordination in countering the maritime piracy. Okay, so these are the major reasons for the maritime piracy. Now, in this context, there are a number of steps that can be taken to counter or to prevent maritime piracy. Now, what are those steps we have to take? And firstly, we need to talk about the maritime security training that has to be imparted for the forces who have been specifically tasked with this with the counter piracy or anti-piracy exercises. So therefore, there should be a proper training for seafarers and crew in the commercial ships, not just the navies of these countries, coast guards of these countries. Rather, there should be a proper training for seafarers and the crew. So that will assist in raising awareness about the privacy or piracy risks. Okay, so this will also ensure that they are equipped to handle these potential attacks on these ships. So after that, we need to talk about the next most important measure, that is maritime surveillance and intelligence. Now, maritime surveillance and intelligence is a very important. This can be achieved through joint collaboration, cooperation between different countries which are and the regions which are vulnerable to the maritime piracy. So, for example, technologies like maritime surveillance and intelligence, technologies like automatic identification system, radar technologies, so they can enhance the situational awareness and enabling prompt actions against these pirates. So therefore, the maritime surveillance and intelligence should also be taken care of. And after that, we need to look for the technological solutions. Now, looking for the technological solutions is one of the best way to counter maritime piracy. So in this context, we need to use advanced technological solutions. So what are those advanced technological solutions? Such as alarms, CCTV cameras on board these ships, and access control systems. So they can detect pirates at a early stage, and they also provide vital evidence for the investigations. So when we conduct investigation, that will help us provide crucial insights how to prevent these maritime attacks. So after that, we should talk about the rapid response capability among these commercial vessels. So not just the rapid response capability, but the countries which are located in these vulnerable regions. So capacity building has to be taken care of. Okay, a ship with an armed helicopter is the most effective way dealing with the piracy like situation, because it can direct the fire and vector the nearest ship that can render the assistance. Okay, so these are the important measures that can prevent the maritime piracy. So apart from that, we need to further encourage collaborative efforts among different naval powers in the region. So if you look at India, it is known as the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. So therefore, Indian Navy can collaborate with other like-minded countries in the in the region, for example UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman. So therefore, when India has been undertaking these collaborative efforts, and that will help preventing these maritime piracy related attacks. So therefore, in this context, collaboration and cooperative efforts among different governments and international organizations. Okay, so for example, International Maritime Organization and naval forces, coast guards, navies of different countries is very important, because it will help in ready sharing of intelligence, surveillance, and coordinated patrols. Joint maritime exercises can be conducted, so which particularly aimed at countering maritime piracy. So apart from this, we need to talk about the piracy risk assessment as well. Now, conducting thorough risk assessments allows ship owners to identify the vulnerabilities, the existing vulnerabilities, so that it can strengthen the security measures, and it can also develop the contingency plans at an early stage. So that will help us counter any maritime piracy related incident on these ships. So apart from that, we need to focus on adopting the best possible practices. So that particularly adhering to the industry best practices so far. So that will help in countering these maritime piracy related incidents, such as best management practices, guidelines, and implementing effective security measures. So that particularly or significantly reduce the risk of piracy incidents. So finally, maritime piracy has become one of the most challenging issue that the world or the global trade has been facing. So this has the potential. So this situation can lead to the supply chain disruptions at the global scale. So the particular initiative by India to deploy the ships into these vulnerable regions have actually making India or further strengthening its status as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. So therefore, in this context, not just India but other regional players also should involve and counter these maritime piracy related incidents, so that a safe passage of ships can be ensured and that will instill a lot of confidence among these ships. So that will not disrupt the global trade, because that will have a lot of implications in terms of supply chain disruption, recession, inflationary pressures, and the safety and security of the crew on board these ships. So therefore, Indian Navy and the government of India, along with other like-minded nations, should collaborate and cooperate to counter the maritime piracy in this Indian Ocean region. Okay, so that's all in this lecture, and if you like our work, please like video and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and thank you.